Hello, this is Let's Talk About Myths, baby. And I am your host, Liv. Except I'm not actually your host today, and technically this isn't Let's Talk About Myths, baby, and that is because today I am bringing you an episode of the brand new podcast, Ancient History 101. It is hosted by Alexandra Sills, who you will all know as my favorite gladiatrix, aka the woman who comes on and tells me all the things about gladiators, and also the same delightful one who shared everything about the Olympics. Oh, it's gross and weird. And now Alexandra is here with a new podcast, having conversations with experts and academics regarding the ancient world, coming at it from a beginner's point of view and an attempt to kind of be able to cover almost the basics of an entire topic in one episode. We're really excited for this. Alexandra's been working on it for like a couple of years, honestly. It's been sort of in the works and then paused and all of these different things, but it's finally here. And today's episode is the second episode of their catalog. You can scroll on over to Ancient History I almost said fangirl. It's not. Ancient History 101 to listen to the other first episode. There are two available now, I believe, or will be within a day or two, in honor of the Ides of March, naturally. And so sit back. This episode we're going to share today is with none other than Owen Reese, who is another fan favorite of this podcast, so you're going to love it. Make sure you subscribe to Ancient History 101 wherever you get your podcasts, and stay tuned because the Memory Collective has more news to come.
Welcome to Ancient History 101, the show that gives you everything you want and need to know about the worlds of ancient Greece, Rome, their friends and their enemies. I'm your host, Alexandra Sills. Today we're going to be digging into the biography of an ancient writer, because I've always been of the opinion that before you read a word of what they've written, you should probably get to know the writer a little bit themselves beforehand. Because everything about their life, their experiences and their identity affects what they've written, right? So we should get to know them. And that's what we're going to be doing today. Xenophon's life reads like an adventure novel, so I have asked one of my favourite people in the world to come onto the show and talk to us about everything Xenophon. You're really going to like it. So we're going to be talking about a historian today. Or was he just a historian? Let's find out. Let's talk to one of our guest experts. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah. My name is Dr. Owen Reese, ancient historian and lecturer of applied humanities down at Birmingham Newman University. And we are getting stuck into, well, he's my favourite historian, but you are right in whether or not he's a historian at all. So we're talking about Xenophon of Athens, who wrote his Hellenica, his history of the Greek world, which sort of takes the story of Thucydides, the great writer of the Peloponnesian War, and sort of finishes his story. Thucydides famously doesn't complete his work, and Xenophon's own history sort of picks it up with a sentence at the beginning of his book, which usually is when historians are saying, I am the great Xenophon and I'm amazing and this is everything I'm going to do. Aren't I brilliant? You will respect me. But his doesn't start like that at all. His very much starts like, and after these things, that's the first sentence. And after these things, so he's clearly continuing the work of Thucydides. We presume it's going to be Thucydides he's continuing.
The sequel.
Yeah, exactly. And then continues the history of what we understand as the Greek world. But I suppose more accurately, the political history of the Greek world up until 360s, which sees the rise of Sparta, the fall of Sparta, the rise of Thebes, the defeat of Thebes at Mantinea, and for Xenophon, the sort of watershed moment where the Greek world as he knew it The status quo had ended. So that's the historian and the writer we're talking about, Xenophon.
So when I was at uni, we did a lot of 5th century Athens because,
Yes.
of course, you do. So we had a lot of Herodotus and a lot of Thucydides.
Mm.
Not a lot of Xenophon, but I don't think that's particularly fair, really, is he? Because he's just as good as the first two, right? As a historian.
Oh, well, okay. Xenophon's an interesting character. So you are absolutely right. He is often underrepresented, underplayed. There is a many moons ago, Greek historian by the name of Rul Kaneinadike used to run a social media series of platforms called Xenophon is Sad. And he would collect quotes from around scholarship and from around the internet of basically people saying things about Xenophon or ignoring Xenophon that would probably make Xenophon sad. So it's things like, the history of the Greek world was given to us by the great historians Herodotus and Thucydides, which is missing a good 70, 80 years, which comes from Xenophon. I mean, the most famous example is the philosopher Bertrand Russell, who is describing Socrates. So Xenophon was one of Socrates' students, knew him very well. And our idea of who Socrates is comes from two main sources, two main accounts, which is the works of Plato, one of his students, and the work of Xenophon. In the modern day, he's considered like the second-rate philosopher.
Right.
And Bertrand Russell famously described the issue of dealing with Xenophon's version of Socrates. So in his stories about Socrates, in his sort of philosophical writings about Socrates, and Bertrand Russell describes it as a stupid man's report of what a clever man says is never accurate.
Oh, no wonder Xenophon is sad.
Exactly. So it's just this idea that Xenophon is too stupid to have really understood what Socrates was saying. And so his presentation of Socrates must be wrong. And so this is the sort of the modern reception
Right.
of poor Xenophon, but it doesn't relate to what the ancient world thought of him. And the ancient world loved Xenophon. They loved his histories. They loved his politics, his political writings. They loved his philosophical work. They considered him a good philosopher. And in many ways, our ancient sources, like the Roman period, when they're reading him and writing about him and things like that, the Roman period, they consider him a philosopher first and the historian second. And in the modern day, we've kind of resurrected his reputation, but generally as a historian rather than necessarily as a philosopher. But we are getting there. His philosophy is interesting. It's just not what Plato's is, basically.
Right. Okay. Full disclosure, I bloody hate Plato. So this is
Can't stand him. Cannot stand him. So
right.
Xenophon's philosophy is useful as a historian. Plato's philosophy is bloody nightmare. Like, what am I actually dealing with here? Like, what is
Yeah.
this? What can I make of this beyond this is what one very clever rich man thought? So yeah, it is an interesting one. So no, I don't have a lot of time for the philosophers except Xenophon.
Good. We're on the same page already. This is excellent. So let's start with Xenophon's beginning. Where was he born? When was he born? What kind of family?
We don't know. We don't know. Probably ninth class, so the second highest class in Athens.
Right.
I say that a bit tongue in cheek. So the traditional time date of his birth is around 430 BC,
Okay.
but ultimately, we don't know.
So we don't have an exact date.
We don't have an exact date, and that is based on supposition. That's based on us sort of drawing information about him from other sources and trying to piece it together. He later on writes a memoir called the Anabasis, which we'll probably get to later. And in it, part of the story is around the Anabasis, which is when he's a mercenary, part of a mercenary army. He's described by later sources as being in like the sort of peak of his life, and it's what you think that means in terms of his
Right.
age, as to then trying to work out when he was born. So there's quite a range of dates given for his birth, but I think it's fair to say he's probably born around 430-ish.
Okay.
So he grew, most importantly for us, doesn't really matter the exact date when he was born sometimes. But for now, what's important for us to note is that he grew up during the Peloponnesian War.
Right.
Now, he obviously writes political history, he writes a lot of military history, and his entire perspective of everything is shaped by his upbringing. And he was brought up during the Peloponnesian War. His father's deme, the sort of village or social group in which he was raised or potentially born in, was outside of the city, so sort of
Uh-huh.
countryside. But because of the Peloponnesian War, he most likely had to be brought into the city during Pericles, who's sort of one of the great leaders of democracy at that point in Athens. His plan was to bring everyone inside the city and protect the city and let the Spartans and the enemies of Athens sort of raid the countryside, but not really cause any problems. So Xenophon would have lived through all that as a young child and then growing up to be a teenager as well. So he would have seen the aftermath of the first peace in the 420s. He would have seen the Sicilian disaster get reported coming back home. Towards the end of the Peloponnesian War, he was probably starting to serve maybe in the cavalry. So he would have been part of some raids, things like that. He would have experienced those sort of things. He would have seen or witnessed or known people very close to the surrender of Athens in 404, the end of the Peloponnesian War. He'd have lived through all that as a young, impressionable Athenian male. He, as I said, he was wealthy. The best guess is that he was of the knightly class, the hippies, which is not the uber wealthy, not the ones who are like Elon Musk-esque in
Right.
Athens. Your sort of billionaire class, if you think of it like that. He's not that. But he is, he's well off. He's comfortable. They're generating a lot of income from farmland and things like that. But beyond that, anyone who says they know anything more about Xenophon is fudging some evidence.
Uh-huh. Okay.
It's made complicated by the fact that Xenophon doesn't really talk about himself openly, which is ironic because he's a main character in his own book. But Xenophon does a lot of his writing almost anonymously. He doesn't assign his name to being the author. So
Right.
it's a really interesting dynamic of Xenophon generally. But ultimately, your guess is as good as mine.
So if he doesn't talk about himself a lot, we've got no real way of working out whether growing up during this massive war kind of scarred him psychologically or whether it, he grew up thinking, war's normal. This is just what we do.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. There's no indication that he is particularly troubled by his experience of war. However, because he has such experience of war, both within the Athenian army or possibly cavalry, and then as a mercenary, and then later on in life, he joins the sort of the retinue of the Spartans. So he also gets insight into the Spartan military system and sees more battles. And his histories, when you read his histories, and this is why as a historian I love him, when you read his histories, you notice that he offers a depth to his description of combat, and more importantly, the experience of combat that no other source does in this period. Herodotus does not at all. The sense that, any sense that there are emotions going on is just not really beyond. He's clearly relaying stories he has no real understanding of.
Yeah.
Thucydides has a better understanding of combat. He himself was a commander. But again, he kind of writes with that standoffish way of explaining everything. So it's not so much the experience of battle as it is what happened in that battle and why that
Right.
battle ended the way it did and what sort of decisions were being made and tactically what was going on. Fascinating. I'm not having a go at it at all. But Xenophon offers feet on the ground, eyes in the eyes of your enemy, that kind of perspective. And it's really interesting to read and to kind of get that feeling of how he most likely interpreted his experiences in combat. And so we get interesting accounts. So we get him describe psychological instability as a result of combat.
Wow.
We see him describe the raw emotions of combat. We see him describe pleasure in massacre. So actually enjoying slaughtering people, or that this is a good thing. We also see one of my favorites is he's the first account that I've ever found in chronologically who describes the freeze reaction of a human being when they're afraid. So fight, flight, or freeze, that kind of quintessential human reaction to threat. He describes it in the Battle of Canaxa, which is in his Anabasis. So it's as part of this mercenary army. And in it, an individual just freezes in the battle line when a chariot is charging towards the battle line. Everyone moves out of the way except for this individual who just can't move. And it's that psychological insight, it is that reality, it is that I don't know how to describe it. It is the kids' gloves off, this is what happens. This is the humanity in combat. This is the reality of warfare. This is not pretty, it is not pleasant, but it is glorious. He does believe that.
Yeah.
And as a result, it's just a fantastic writer for that perspective. If you're not looking for that perspective, I imagine he frustrates people quite a lot. But it's the perspective I come from. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So he brings that experience to what he's writing about. But no, we don't really get the impression that he's particularly psychologically damaged or traumatized by what he writes about. But he is interested in those emotional and psychological, what we would consider psychological ramifications of war.
Which we don't often see in ancient sources.
No, absolutely not, because it sort of challenges perceptions of masculinity. It challenges perceptions of why people fight and that it's a glorious thing to do. One of the reasons I find Xenophon so fascinating is because he still finds that glory. He still finds that cultural assumptions
Yeah.
about war.
So he's not quite, Siegfried Sassoon level war
No.
is utterly terrible, but
No,
he is
no.
at least, at least he's talking about emotions, which
Yeah.
is really, that's quite special, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I could go on all day about how amazing he is as a source for this because he is amazing. Like he even talks about seeing things in not necessarily in combat itself, but on campaign that could have an effect on people. So there's one example in his Anabasis. So again, this campaign. The reason why I keep coming back to the Anabasis is because it's like the first memoir we have in the ancient world. So the idea that someone wrote down a 2-year period of their life, how they remember it, what happened, and everything like that is just an amazing piece of evidence. So in it, on the many stories he tells, one of the stories is the Greek army is very much marching home. They're trying to get home. They lost the Battle of Canaxa, although the Greeks refused to accept that. They thought they won it. And then they're trying to march home. The Persians are very much annoying them, trying to kill them as they leave, but the Greeks are marching home. And it's sort of a fighting retreat through Mesopotamia, so sort of what we think of as Iraq, and then through into what we would consider sort of Syria, Armenia, and then a bit of Turkey as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a moment where they have to take a position of a sort of a fortified settlement. And the people defending it realize that all hope is lost. They're going to lose. And the women and children start throwing or being thrown off a cliff. The idea being they would rather die than be captured.
Because we all know what happens when women are
Because
captured.
we all know what happens when you get captured by the Greeks. So there is a story, he tells a story of an individual trying to stop a woman from doing this and failing. And he doesn't really go into a lot of detail beyond that, but you always ask the question, why has he told this story? Why has he put this in? And it is, you do wonder if this is him very much reflecting on everything that's going on here. And, so there is this sense of why would they be doing this? This is a horrible thing to see. We're actually trying to save these people from killing themselves. So it's just that kind of that depth, those kind of angles on Greek warfare that don't often get talked about. The human element, both for combatants and in this example, for non-combatants as well. And it's interesting that Xenophon is noticing. And not only is he noticing, he thinks other people might want to know about it.
And does he come to the conclusion that they're terrified because we are civilized, but to them pretty brutal?
If I remember rightly, he does very much understand why they're doing this. It doesn't ever stop him from doing it.
Right. That's the important part.
So always remember, any source is built in its own web of moral understanding. And it is not ones we can share because it is culturally as well as personally dictated. So they can acknowledge that war has negatives and downsides, and it is scary. I mean, there's is it Pindar, the Greek poet, I think it is, who has the line about it is only men who have not seen war that crave it.
Yeah.
And this is something Thucydides kind of mirrors as well. So there's a few sources in the Greek world who point this out. Like, war is not a nice place to be, but it is where glory is found.
Okay. So he's acknowledging that non-combatants can be terrified for genuine reasons, but it's not enough to stop him wanting the collateral damage if it's going to get him.
If he gets him what he wants. And there is a level of pragmatism in Xenophon's work. And this is it. We're not supposed to like these people. If you're going into history, you're only reading about people you want to like.
You're going to find any of them.
You're not going to find one. That's not the point. So it's about trying to understand him, trying to understand his context as best we can, and the context of his work. From a historical point of view, I'm not a classicist. I don't care about like the sort of the literary aspect of what's going on here in terms of like whether it's good, whether it's timeless, or I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in how can I use this as evidence.
Yeah.
As a historian. And so, we need to understand those contexts, including his own context. And as I mentioned earlier, we know so little about him, which is ridiculous because he was so famous in the ancient world. But we know so little about him that's actually very difficult. So often what we do as historians is we basically decide the Xenophon we want.
So multifaceted, different to everybody.
Precisely that. So to some people, he's an oligarchic lover. So he hates democracy, loves the Spartans. So we can trust everything he says about Sparta, but we can't trust anything he says about democracy. So you build this idea of that Xenophon. Another Xenophon is that he is no fool. He's a wise, sort of clever, worldly. He spent many years away from Greece. He's interacted with Persians, he's interacted with all these different cultures, so he knows what he's talking about, but in the same way that perhaps like a grizzled old general of 40 years in the army, understands a way of the world that perhaps we find uncomfortable, but doesn't mean it's wrong. So then I build a different Xenophon. That's the Xenophon I want to talk about. So whenever you're dealing with Xenophon, you always got to, one, decide what Xenophon is it you think you're talking about. And two, if you're ever reading other people's descriptions of Xenophon, get to grips as fast as you can. Who is this Xenophon that they've built, that they're talking about?
So these are the pitfalls.
These are the pitfalls of using him. These are the pitfalls of reading about him. But he is amazing. You just don't have to like him. But he is amazing.
Fair enough. So we've been talking about his military service and talking about him going all the way to Persia. Why? Why is he going to Persia? How old is he at this point? Where is he his career that he wants to suddenly go to Persia?
His age, we just covered his age, the problems with his age.
You know what I mean. Is he still a young man? Is he, he's some veteran?
He describes himself as a young man. He's probably in his 20s, probably no older than 30. Why is he gone? So, 404 BC, Athens has fallen. It's lost the Peloponnesian War. The democracy has been removed and it has been replaced with the so-called 30 tyrants. So this is a small oligarchy put in place by the Spartans to run Athens. It runs for about a year before there is a democratic uprising against it, and then it's overthrown. In the aftermath of this, there was an amnesty. So if you supported the 30 tyrants, or if you fought on the side of the 30 tyrants during the Civil War, there was an amnesty. You couldn't really be prosecuted for that because it was their way of going, we need to put a line under this and move on. As a city, we need to move on. Now, that didn't stop people from gossiping, as nothing ever does. So one of the groups that was identified as supporting the 30 tyrants were the cavalry. So people wealthy enough to own horses and to serve in the cavalry. Now, you'll remember that includes Xenophon. Now, there's a whole debate as to whether or not Xenophon actually fought with the 30 tyrants or not. That doesn't matter. What matters in Athens is if you were part of the cavalry, you could be associated with the 30 tyrants.
Okay.
Add to that, his teacher and mentor, Socrates. Now, Socrates, at this point, the great philosopher, of Athens, been around for decades at this point. But at the end of the Peloponnesian War and after the 30 tyrants, he was coming into a bit of a pickle because many of his former students had formed that tyranny.
So he's suspicious.
So he is now a suspicious character because everyone knew that he only really educated the rich, the elite in Athens. But now that rich and elite had shown their true colours, is the idea. So Xenophon has a dual problem. One, his association with the cavalry. Two, his association with Socrates. So he gets an opportunity offered to him by a friend from outside of Athens who basically goes, there is a prince in Persia called Cyrus. Cyrus the Younger, who is basically putting together an army of mercenaries. And he's trying to recruit the best mercenaries he can. Do you want to join? And Xenophon doesn't say yes. He goes and do what every good student does. He goes and talks to his teacher, Socrates. So he goes up to Socrates and goes, I've been offered this opportunity. What do you think? Socrates goes, it might be a bit of an issue. You might end up getting associated with the Persians. This may not do good things for your reputation in Athens. You've got to think about this. But no matter what you do, you must talk to the god at Delphi, Apollo.
Mm-hmm.
So go to the oracle at Delphi and ask them what you should do. Should you go or should you not? Now, Xenophon, good student, does as he's told. So he makes the journey to Delphi, and about halfway up, he realizes, I want to go. I don't want Apollo to say no. So he changes his question. So he doesn't ask, should I go or should I not go? He asks, basically, when I go, what sacrifices should I make before leaving? And the oracle at Delphi gives him an answer. These are the sacrifices you should make. So off he goes back to Athens and goes up to Socrates and goes, I asked, I have the blessing, I know what I need to do, I'm ready to go. Socrates, wise old man that he was, goes, what did you ask?
He found a loophole.
Xenophon tells him, and Socrates is unimpressed, but ultimately acknowledges that you have to do what the gods have now just told you. So
Okay.
you have found this loophole. You are wrong to have done that. This is not going to be good for you. However, you have to now do it because you've asked the gods
Right.
and the gods have given you an answer. Follow through that answer.
And it's worth mentioning, isn't it, as well, that Socrates, I mean, we have this impression of this old bearded man talking nonsense in the agora all the time. But
All right, Aristophanes.
I'll take it. But it's worth mentioning that Socrates had military experience as well. So he wasn't giving nonsense advice, was he? He had
No.
experience.
Yeah, the impression we have of Socrates as the old philosopher is very much him at the end of his life. It's the Socrates that Xenophon writes about, and it's the Socrates that Plato writes about, the old Socrates. But Plato, interestingly, does talk about his earlier expeditions, his earlier fun times. So we know that we know that he fought in at least 3 major battles during the Peloponnesian War.
Right.
Probably in his 40s, so he wasn't a young man. So we know that. We also know that he was well regarded for his military performance in those battles. Interestingly, 2 of those battles are like major defeats.
Okay.
So he leaves defeats of the Athenian army with his reputation intact, so which is not easy to do. The thing I always think too, when it comes to Socrates famously gets killed. He is executed by the Athenian people for basically corrupting the youth and for spreading impious thoughts and things like that. And they attack him for anything they can attack him for. So they accuse him of anything they can accuse him for. What no one ever accuses him of, ever, is cowardice.
Fair enough.
Which is really unusual because in Athens, it's the sort of thing you accuse someone of. You ran away from a defeat. You left the battlefield when you shouldn't have. I saw you throw your shield away. These are the kind of things you attack people with. And when Socrates is very much challenged with everything he's done wrong and is fighting for his life in a court of law, it never comes up. And so much so, Socrates uses his military experience to build his own case of his defense. Not to say, I'm great, look at these things I did, but very much like I did at these battles, I am here to stand my ground. So he uses it. So again, you open yourself up to critique if you do that.
Yeah.
So it is interesting. So yeah, you're right. Socrates, grizzled war veteran. That's how I like to describe him. Grizzled war veteran. And so yeah, the advice he's given Xenophon is he's no fool. He does know what he's talking about. And also he has a good understanding of the Athenian situation as well. So when he's saying this may not turn out well for you in Athens, again, he's not pulling that from nothing. He's not just trying to convince his student not to leave. This is based on his understanding of everything he sort of experienced.
Am I right in thinking that one of these battles that Socrates was involved in during the Peloponnesian War that Xenophon was there as well and that they fought close by?
Now, there is a story. So this is the story that comes from later Roman writers, because later Roman
Ah.
writers are rubbish. So there is a story, I think it's like Pliny, and I think Diogenes writes about it as well, who wrote the biography of Xenophon. The only biography we have of Xenophon is
Mhm.
from a writer called Diogenes Laertius. And in it, they describe him at the Battle of Delium, which is in the 420s.
Okay.
Now, Xenophon was probably born around the 430 mark. You can see where I'm going with this.
I can.
The story they've probably got wrong is in the classical Greek sources. There is a story that Alcibiades fought alongside Socrates. So Alcibiades, as I like to call him, super sexy Alcibiades, is how to best understand him. He's
Yeah.
super sexy Alcibiades. Everyone is infatuated with him. He's a beautiful young man, and then as he sort of grows older, he becomes this real demagogue. He can really manipulate the people with his beautiful words and his beautiful ways. He's a super sexy guy, but he's also a turncoat. He's a coward. He's a traitor. His story is story is phenomenal. There's nothing quite like it in the classical Greek world. Anyway, as a young man, rich Athenian, he was a student of Socrates.
Uh-huh.
Socrates is said to have been quite infatuated with him, and to have found him very pleasing to look at. So
Right.
there is this sort of undercurrent to any story about Socrates and Alcibiades. Anyway, story goes that they were on the Battle of, I think it's Delium, when Alcibiades, it's during the retreat, Alcibiades basically falls and he's protecting, and Socrates very much helps him and sort of stands firm and sort of gets him out. And that's the famous story that the Roman writers then, for some reason, decide is Xenophon.
Uh-huh. Okay. We know it's a student. We know it's someone who spent time in Sparta.
We know he's super sexy. Xenophon is described as a beautiful young man.
Is he?
Yeah.
I'm liking him
Socrates
more.
had a keen eye for pretty
Sexy man.
sexy men. He liked them. He liked to be around them.
I'm glad that me and Socrates have something in common.
Which is interesting. It is interesting because because Xenophon's description of Socrates, is very much of one of self-restraint. That's the core message of Socrates from Xenophon: self-restraint, self-control. Whereas Plato's Socrates is very much self-knowledge.
Right.
So more highfalutin, head in the clouds. Let's think about the world and existence and our place within it and all that kind of stuff. Whereas Xenophon is much more down to earth and it's about controlling one's desires. So it's interesting that he surrounds himself with pretty things.
So if we hear the story about Xenophon and Socrates in a battle, it's some Roman who's not done his due diligence and has written the wrong
Yes.
reference. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you learn nothing else, learn not to trust Roman writers.
Controversial. Okay, so put two historians with ADHD in a room and see how long it takes them to go off on a tangent.
Where were
Why
we?
is he going to Persia?
Okay, so he's off to Persia. Basically, he's either off to get out of Athens before he gets accused of things because of the atmosphere in Athens during this reconciliation, which is because, of course, this is the lead up. So 401 is when he's gone and he's joined the mercenary army within the Greek contingent. So the Greek contingent are all the Greek mercenaries that basically Cyrus wanted. And they're famously called the 10,000, even though there weren't 10,000 of them.
How do we know?
Because Xenophon literally counts them out. Like, he tells us how many there are. So he's like, there's 700 from here, there's 400 from here, there's 800 from there. And you add them up, and there's like 12,000 or something. It's not 10,000.
So they're not even rounding up. They're rounding down. Why?
Yeah.
That seems okay. 12,000 sounds good.
It does, doesn't it? But Xenophon doesn't call them that. He calls them the Syrians, so the men of Cyrus. That's how he kind of refers to them, or the people that fought with Cyrus. That's how he refers to them. So in his Hellenica, in his history of the Greek world, this mercenary army, spoiler alert, makes it back from Mesopotamia and survives, and then gets used by the Spartans because it's basically a mercenary army at this point, very experienced, very gristled, know what they're doing, and they appear in a battle in the Greek world, and Xenophon refers to them as the men that fought with Cyrus. That's their name.
So he doesn't use the 10,000. We use the 10,000.
Yeah.
Right.
So why were they there? Okay, yeah, that's why they're there. So they're there basically for Xenophon to get out of Athens, but also, like, he's getting paid.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
there's money and there's hope. There was a draw here, which is that because you got to remember, we don't know what the repercussions of the Peloponnesian War has had on the family income of Xenophon.
Right.
But it is possible there is a financial motive here. We don't know. But he joins the army, and his memoir, The Anabasis, is the 2-year period in which he is going into the Persian Empire and then trying to march out of it to safety.
So what does the word anabasis mean?
Oh, it literally means like march upland.
Okay, so that gives you a clue which direction they're going in.
Or march inland might be sort of another way of translating it. But that's what it means. So it's just their march inland, upland. That's it. That's all it is. That's all it is. But it's this is the idea. So it's the march. It's everything that's going on. So it has one major battle in it, which is the battle between Cyrus the Younger and his brother, the king Artaxerxes. So the battle for the Persian throne.
Okay.
Cyrus the Younger gets killed in battle and his army gets defeated. The Greeks, unfortunately, won their side of the battle. So they pushed the Persian back and chased after them. Like every good Greek does. They forget about the rest of the battle and they're worried about glory.
Right.
So they charge after them. And then basically, once they stop, they kind of have a rest and a meal. And they're like, oh, that was good. Well done, team. And news then comes that Cyrus died and that actually they've lost. But the Greeks refuse to kind of acknowledge this because to them, they've won.
Okay.
So there's then this kind of wrangling with the Persians because the Persians are like, give up your weapons and join us. And the Greeks are like, I don't really trust that. And then they're like, well, okay, fine, leave. And the Greeks are like, no, I don't trust you're going to let us do that either. So it becomes like a fighting retreat. Okay. So the Greeks are trying to march upland back to the Black Sea to try and get out. And the Persians are trying to basically either get rid of them or get rid of them, depending on how you interpret that phrase.
Because you don't want 12,000 armed men just wandering around
You do not
territory.
want a experienced Greek army just marching around the Persian Empire.
Because if Prince Cyrus is dead, right, they're not getting paid by anyone at this point. So how are they feeding themselves?
Yeah. Really good question. They are taking what they want. There are markets and things that they can interact with, but ultimately armies on the move take what they want, take what they need.
So there's a good reason to want the Greeks out of Persia because they're a nuisance.
They are precisely that. They're exactly a nuisance. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell. Within the first couple of books of the Anabasis, Xenophon doesn't really appear.
Right.
Because he's just like a hoplite. He's just another, he's just another man in the ranks.
Okay.
And then there is a moment where the Greek commanders are tricked by the Persians to meet with them and basically negotiate what could happen so they can get out. And they fell for it, and all the commanders were slaughtered or taken back to Persia and imprisoned. So that left the Greeks very much like, we have no commanders, and we're in the middle of the Persian Empire.
Who don't want us here.
Us here. Like, what on earth do we do? And it's interesting. If you read the Anabasis, there's a lovely moment where Xenophon gives a biography to every single commander who died.
Oh.
So he talks about them all. And he talks about them in terms of their leadership. So it's very much like you've got the Spartan guy, a guy called Clearchus, who's hard-lined, not very pleasant, not a nice man to be around, but definitely who you want to lead you in battle. Because he has that experience. He has that, so very Spartan.
Pretty Spartan, yeah.
And then you've got other ones who are a bit cowardly or a bit manipulative or a bit, so he goes through all the, they've got good bits, they've got bad bits, they've got good bits, they've
Yeah.
got bad bits, or they've just got bad bits. And then the kind of the narrative device here is the next page is when Xenophon then steps up and offers to lead himself. So it's you got to see it in terms of a storytelling device. It's very much, here are all the commanders. Here's what they're good at. Here's what they're not good at. And here's what this is what a good commander could do but doesn't do. And then came forth the great commander,
Me.
Xenophon himself. Yeah. It's an interesting thing because, as I said, Xenophon doesn't actually describe himself as writing this Anabasis, so he doesn't put his
Right.
name to it. And in his other writings, he actually assigns it to someone else.
Oh, that's interesting.
Guy from Syracuse, someone we otherwise know nothing about. He says they wrote it.
Nom de plume.
Yeah, and Plutarch, the Greco-Roman writer in the 1st century CE, he was the one that called it out and went, "No, he didn't. This is clearly Xenophon himself." And if you
Is
read the
Plutarch
Anabasis,
right?
of course he is. Roman writers might be wrong, but Greek writers in the Roman period are always right.
Plutarch's right.
But no, in all seriousness, Plutarch's point here is, and he is right. If you read through, like, Xenophon is clearly writing his own memoirs. It's clearly about him because he just knows everything Xenophon's thinking in the book.
Yeah.
And he starts talking about like like the story I gave you of his meeting with Socrates. That comes from the Anabasis.
Okay.
So Xenophon feeds these personal anecdotes from his life in through the Anabasis, often entirely inconsequentially.
So it becomes pretty obvious. How would anyone else know all of these tiny details from Xenophon's life if it isn't actually an autobiography?
But it is interesting because we don't have every piece of evidence from the Greek world. I wish we did, but we don't. Actually, no, I don't wish we did. Could you imagine sifting
That'd be
through
too
that?
much.
That'd be way too
Good
much.
grief.
That'd be like modern history. That's ridiculous.
No, I mean, I know we complain that we don't have a lot, but I'd rather have
We
too
have
little
more than
than
we say.
everything.
We do have more than we say. It does seem that Xenophon probably wrote this Anabasis to answer criticisms about himself from other people who have written about this event.
Okay, so who else is writing about it then?
Other people from within the army.
So they're all writing
We don't
memoirs?
have any of them. We don't have any of these existing. We don't know how many were written, but there's at least one that Diodorus of Sicily mentions just in passing. And it's probable that Xenophon is at least in part almost defending his character and defending his decision-making during the retreat.
These other accounts, have they not survived because they were a bit crap in comparison, or have we just been unlucky?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I will extrapolate that we should ask, why have all of Xenophon's work survived? Because that's really the question.
Okay.
Because ultimately, why does an account not survive? Happenstance, survival bias, luck, interest. We've got the titles of all the plays written by some of the great tragedians, your Aeschylus, your Euripides, Sophocles. But we only have a small collection of them that survive today. It doesn't mean the others weren't good. And in many ways, they might well be better. We don't know.
Yeah.
We haven't got them.
Okay. So we don't know why Xenophon's has survived then.
Xenophon's, there might be an answer. And one of them is he's such a famous writer. Like, the ancient world was obsessed with Xenophon. They loved his work. Even they loved to criticize it. So they criticize his Greek, they criticize his philosophy sometimes, but others are like, no, it's brilliant, it's amazing. So he's clearly this kind of Marmite figure that you either love or hate.
Right.
Probably true today as well. But one of the other reasons Xenophon has survived as long as he has and as well as he has, because like I mentioned, the ancient world describes 15 titles of works he wrote.
That's a lot.
15 is quite a lot. He's a polymath. He's a great man, a great writer, not a great individual, but a great writer. 15 works. We have all 15 titles on a list, and we have today copies of every single one of them.
Wow. Is there any other writer that we have that for?
I can't think of one. It doesn't mean there's not, but I can't think of one unless you think like Herodotus, but he only wrote one.
Yeah, he wrote one thing. That doesn't count.
Yeah, and to be honest, I've never looked it up. I've never looked up. Did Herodotus ever write anything else? So I don't know if that's true. But
Uh-huh.
even Thucydides, who wrote his one book, isn't finished.
Okay.
Xenophon, we have everything he wrote in full, including a spurious one that we're pretty sure he didn't write.
Which is
Constitution of the Athenians, the so-called Old Oligarch, if you've ever heard of it.
yeah, I've got PTSD from undergrad. Thank you for
You're
sparking
welcome.
that off.
Yeah.
Thank
All you
you.
need to know for this session is that he probably didn't write it. It used to
Right.
be considered one of his works, but now it's usually people assume he didn't write it. But of course, that's all based on who you think Xenophon is and what you decide about him before you make decisions.
Sure.
So one of the reasons people say he didn't write it is because stylistically it's not as good as his other works. But he probably, if he did write it, he probably wrote it as a young man.
Fair enough.
So probably wouldn't be as good, would it?
No, I guess not.
But generally speaking, it's assumed he didn't write it. But 15 is the list. We have all 15. That is really unusual. Partly, some of his works are considered the first of its kind.
Mm-hmm.
So his Anabasis is the first memoir that we have. So the importance of that. The Anabasis was also considered a bit of a blueprint of what to do if you're going to invade Persia, or kind of an inspiration
Okay.
for it. It is said that Alexander the Great was inspired by the Anabasis. And the idea that he would read it and go, "Oh, look what just 10,000 Greek men could do. Imagine what my army could do." That kind of idea. His Hellenica was considered sort of on par and a continuation of Thucydides, so again, important. His Constitution of the Spartans, an understanding of Spartan culture, Spartan politics, important. His Cyropedia. So he wrote what is possibly one of the first pieces of historical fiction or historical
Ah.
romance um,
Okay.
in the ancient world. So it's basically a fictionalized story of Cyrus the Great, the creator of the Persian Empire, basically. And he uses it very much to sort of talk about good leadership and that sort of thing. But it is pretty much a fictional story of Cyrus the Great.
Okay. And I mean, he's clearly spent time in the Persian Empire, so I'm assuming
Yeah.
he's got,
So he's picking up these stories, he's picking up these traditions, he finds them
yeah.
interesting, and he's obviously intrigued by the idea of Cyrus's own sort of rise and what he learned along the way and all that sort of thing. Then you've got his Socratic works, which again were considered really important. He was considered the practical philosopher,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to Plato's high-flying, highfalutin, kind of highbrow way of looking at philosophy. I often think of him as the drunk man in a pub who comes up
Right.
and he sits next to you and goes, "Come sit here and let me tell you about life." So his Socratic work, the philosophies, are not really of Socrates himself, but of his learning from Socrates and what
Yeah.
he's sort of done with it, his defense of Socrates, his implementation of what he took from Socrates, basically. Very practical. So it's often linked
Okay.
to how to run a household. It's often linked to agriculture. It's linked to the relationship between a man and a wife. There's a section of his oikonomikos, his economics, so his
Mm-hmm.
basically how to run a household, which is often tongue-in-cheek referred to as how to train your wife.
Okay. Okay.
You get the idea?
Cooling slightly on Xenophon, slightly.
Yeah. I told you weren't supposed to like him.
I mean,
But anyway, so he did a symposium. So symposium with these big drinking parties in Athens,
mm-hmm.
and this is where supposedly they would be discussing like Homeric poetry and philosophy and all these highfalutin things. But really, they're all getting pissed and looking at porn and watching pretty boys and girls do things, basically. But having these
Okay.
highfalutin conversations. So he wrote something called his Symposium, which is like sort of one of his sort of lessons from Socrates, fictional or otherwise. And basically there's a dialogue going on and it's
Mm-hmm.
to discuss things. Interestingly, Plato did a similar one. So he has his Symposium where it goes like, Plato's Symposium is, it's all about the philosophy, and it's all about the thinking, it's all about the clever repartee and how brilliant Socrates is.
Bloody
Xenophon's is almost all about sex, desire, restraining that desire if you can, and entertainment, what's going on in the room.
Okay.
And it ends, one of my favorite endings to anything in a Greek source, it ends with a sex show, a live sex show. And all the unmarried men in the room stay, watch, and think, I should get married. And all the married men get home, jump on the horses and go, I need to see my wife. So there's a real practical, humorous element to Xenophon's Symposium. It's supposed to be funny
Yeah.
as well. There's a satirical nature to what's going on. It's playful. And actually, a lot of what he's talking about is playfulness.
Because
So there is
Plato
a bit.
is not funny. Plato is the
Plato
opposite
is
of
not
funny.
funny. Plato is not funny at all. Xenophon is funny.
So if you're going to
Sometimes.
read any Greek philosophy and you don't want to, die of boredom,
Yeah.
maybe
Maybe it's Xenophon.
start with Xenophon.
But he also wrote like practical guides. So like how to look after and train and use horses. Like how you hunt with dogs. Just like practical
Okay.
guides. He did one on being a cavalry commander. Like what a cavalry commander should consider and should make sure they're good at. So he's got these very practical side to him as well, and this has always kind of piqued people's interest. But there is another side to it, which is that Xenophon wrote in very simple Greek, very easy to read Greek. So there
Okay.
is also an educational element. So if you need to learn ancient Greek and you want to start somewhere, you would start with Xenophon.
So we can kind of guess that he's writing for a wider audience than some of his peers then.
Yeah.
That's nice.
I think that's fair. It is nice. Forget everything else about him. That is nice. And so another possibility for his survival of all his works is because they're constantly being studied, not necessarily just for their content, but also for the Greek.
So this simple Greek, is this one of the reasons that certain classicists have demoted him below other writers then? Because it's
you are
not
spot on.
lyrical
Yeah.
and it's not posh.
Yeah.
And it's not
Yeah.
elegant.
It's ironic, isn't it? And he was actually lauded in the ancient world for his use of his use of simple Greek to express complicated things. So he was kind of lauded for his use of that language in that way. And then by about the 19th century, this went the other way. And it was very much, it's simple, it's basic, it's vulgar, it's not as clever. We should be having to work really hard. If you ever have to suffer through reading Plato in Greek, it is horrendous. And if you ever have to suffer reading Thucydides in the Greek, it's horrific. And Xenophon just isn't. It is so much easier to work with.
Which is why certain classicists don't rate him.
Yeah, I think there's also something to be said for. I was taught Greek by a guy called John Taylor, who wrote the book. He literally wrote the textbook on learning ancient Greek at school. He also edits the dictionaries and stuff like that. So he's a big player in sort of teaching ancient Greek. And I always remember him talking about this. And he said he always wondered if it was because 19th century scholars had to read Xenophon over and over again in school, and they got sick of him. And so it's almost like that backlash of no, he's terrible. You made me do it for homework and I'm not doing it ever again. He's rubbish.
Okay.
So yeah, you do wonder if there's a bit of a bias against him from
Snobbery.
Snobbery, basically, yeah. So but that's irrelevant. What's important for us, Xenophon survives. All his work survive, and that's unusual. But unfortunately, we can't really date them.
Okay. I'm guessing he's not writing them as he's, evacuating from Asia Minor.
Yeah, precisely. So we don't know if he was working off notes. We don't know if he was working off just memory. We don't know any of it. He gives clues within bits of work when he refers to things that we know happen later.
Right.
So we know he probably was writing most of these after the fact.
Sure.
And quite a bit far after the fact. Probably when he's exiled from Athens, which happens in the 390s. He then spends a bit of time with the Spartans, and the Spartans give him a home up towards Elis and towards Olympia.
Okay.
He's given a home there. So it might be there when he's in exile that he starts writing a lot of these. But we don't really know. We don't know the order he wrote them in.
Do we know why he was exiled from Athens?
Barely. The
Really?
ancient sources give a couple of possibilities, so we don't really know. We just know
What
he
are the
did.
rumours?
So the rumors is Socrates was right, and he shouldn't have gone to Persia.
Right.
Um, Other rumor is it's to do with his relationship with Socrates. It's relationship to do with possibly the tyranny, and sort of a backlash of that. We don't really know. Another rumor is that it wasn't anything to do with any of that. It was to do with his relationship with Sparta, and
Okay.
that was why
What
he was
was his
exiled.
relationship with Sparta? Because he grew up in a city that was at war with Sparta
Yeah.
for decades. So, what is
Yeah.
his relationship with them?
So during his time as a mercenary, he works under various Spartan commanders. So he gets to know them quite a bit. And then by the end of their sort of excursion out of the Persian Empire, he ends up coming into the retinue of the Spartan king, Agesilaus II.
Okay.
So he hasn't even got back to Greece yet. Basically, they go back and continue military service in Asia Minor and what is now modern Turkey. And he's in the retinue of Agesilaus II. It seems that Agesilaus, when he comes back to Greece to fight a battle, or a series of battles between the Spartans and a new alliance, which included Athens, against him.
Okay.
Agesilaus came back to Greece, fought the Athenians, the Thebans, and various groups in battle and won. Xenophon seems to have been there on the Spartan
Ah,
side.
okay.
Again, depending on what you want to make of Xenophon, you either think he may have fought in the battle or he might have just been there but not fought in it.
Right.
There's no real clear-cut answer to that question. But it seems to be after that he is exiled.
So he spent all this time with these Spartans in Persia. They've buried the hatchet because they've got a new common enemy.
Mm.
Is he just under the impression that actually he's got quite a lot as a Greek? He's got quite a lot in common with the Spartans after all, particularly in comparison with the Persians? Or is it just that Agesilaus is paying him? Show me the money.
Show me the money. It's an interesting question. There's no answer to that question, basically. Any answer I give you is entirely supposition. So
Speculative. Okay.
I'm going to speculate.
Yeah, go for it.
I think he's an adventure seeker.
It sounds like it, doesn't it?
I think he's an adventure seeker, and I think he knows the ramifications of what he's doing.
But it's just irresistible.
It's just irresistible. That's my impression. I very much doubt many people would agree with that, by the way. But that's my impression of him.
That's fair enough. We'll
So
take
he
it.
then goes to Sparta. The reason why that's important is because Xenophon is arguably our very best source for Spartan culture and
Interesting.
Spartan politics, because he spent time with the Spartan king, he spent time with the Spartan army, he spent time in and around Spartan land, and was given a home, admittedly not in the sort of core of Sparta or in the sort of Laconia and Messenia, the lands of Sparta, but he is
Yeah.
given a home under the control and protectorate of the Spartans. There are ancient history rumors. So within the ancient sources, there are rumors that his children went through the Spartan training system, the agoge.
Okay.
But that's debated. But, just this idea that he was that closely connected with the Spartans. So when he talks about Spartan politics, when he talks about the Spartan army, he obviously has his agendas, he has his interests, he has the things that he does tell us and doesn't tell us, and you got to treat it with kids' gloves as always. But if he says something that is contradicted by a later source, I am more likely to believe Xenophon.
Okay. And did he personally know this king? Would he have been, chatting with him, or is he just
Yeah.
seeing him from a distance?
No. He seems to have personally known him, and also, I mean, he wrote one of the works that we have that survive of him is a eulogistic biography of Agesilaus II,
Right.
which seems to have been circulated after Agesilaus II died, which is very much like how great Agesilaus was and how
So in
brilliant he is.
writing this, was he thinking at the time, I'm really cutting every tie with my home city doing this? I'm fully aware this is it.
No, not really, because ultimately his exile, like most Athenian exiles, they're not forever.
Okay.
And there is a suggestion that he did go back to Athens at some point.
Right.
He never mentions it.
Okay.
He never mentions it. The story goes that he went from his place in and around Elis. He then ended up in Corinth. And according to most traditions, he died in Corinth. However, if you look at his final work, it's something called his Ways and Means, his final work, he seems to have returned to Athens at some point because he has a good understanding of what's going on.
He was never fully banished then. He was able to return
Yeah.
at some point.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Can we assume then that it's when he's living in the Peloponnese, this is when he's doing the bulk of his writing?
Yeah, I think this is pretty fair to say. But like I said, we don't really know the order in which he writes them. We don't really know exactly when he writes a lot of them. Like even scholars of his histories, his Hellenica, are pretty sure that the first 2 books of it were probably written at a completely different time to the rest of it. So
Okay.
it's something he obviously went back to and added to, and editing processes as well. So even if we accept when he finished it, that doesn't tell us when he started writing it. So yeah, why am I telling you this? Really, this is just to understand the difficulty of making assumptions about him and his work. Because we
Okay.
can't even securely date. He's writing during the 4th century, definitely. Pretty much definitely. I said that too confidently, Alexandra. No, he did. He was writing during the 4th century, and he probably died in the 350s.
Okay. And
Okay.
what time does the Hellenica cover? We know it starts when Thucydides finishes.
Oh yeah, literally mid-sentence. That's where it
Yeah.
starts, and it ends 362 at the Mountain Air.
So he's talking about a time that he lived through, obviously,
Yep.
but he's also talking from the perspective of someone who knows Athenians, he knows Spartans. He's probably talked to Greeks of all kinds of cities during his mercenary days.
Mm.
That makes him quite an interesting source then, because he's
It does.
got this multiple perspective
Yeah.
built in.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think this is sometimes where people want things from Xenophon that is probably unfair.
What do they want?
They want him to be a historian and a good one. I want him to be a source, which is not the
Sure.
same. So people sort of look to him and go, his judgment of this, that, and the other, or his use of evidence isn't very forthcoming, or his assessment of this is skewed by his religious beliefs and things like that. Whereas as a historian of that period now, I'm like, good, I can use that. I
Yeah.
can do things like that. I can get an understanding of what's going on. So something that often comes up is Xenophon seems to be a very pious man. Okay, so
Okay.
he puts a lot of store in his stories for doing the right things towards the gods. So whether it be sacrifices or what have you, and also when things go wrong, he will sometimes say that's because of what has happened that has upset the gods, basically.
Right.
Not all the time, but there are a couple of instances where it's like this was sacrilegious behavior. They deserve what came to them as a result. That's what happened. So from a historian to a historian point of view, I'm like, this is useless supposition. What are you talking about? But from an ancient historian today, reading that, what we can see is actually sort of how ingrained their religious belief systems were, and also his descriptions of it gives us insight into things that no other source talks about, such as religious activity on the march, religious activity when they come home from the march. So that kind of homecoming.
Okay.
And it's Xenophon that describes it. Thucydides doesn't really describe it. Herodotus doesn't describe it. We wouldn't have it. It's him. He describes it because it mattered to him. He also describes things that can be problematic for historians because it contradicts everything else that we've been told about a particular thing. So the example for this is something I had to do a lot of work on during my former years, which was on the burial of the war dead. in ancient Athens. So what do you do with the
Yeah.
war dead in ancient Athens? Ancient Athens famously buried their dead in Athens itself. They gave it a public funeral. They brought the dead back. They repatriated their war dead. They're the first city-state, country, state of any description to do this in human history because it's a
Right.
major undertaking.
Yeah.
But the commitment, the financial, the manpower, it's a major undertaking. And this is the story we get. This is Thucydides describes it. No one questions it. It's all pretty hunky dory. That's what happened. They burn the bodies on the battlefield and they take them home.
Right.
Xenophon describes them burying them on the battlefield. Well, burying them on campaign. He describes them burying them where they are. I think he's in Ephesus. So it's during a sort of a naval campaign in sort of Asia Minor, and he describes the Athenian dead being buried and left there.
Okay.
So problematic is this simple sentence he writes. So problematic it is that some of the sort of great classicists who have studied him describe it as a slip of the pen. So like
Right.
he's just made a mistake. You know, that's an odd mistake to make.
I mean, yeah, he's there.
He's a military commander. He knows what you do with the dead.
Yeah. Okay. So people assume that he's wrong.
Yeah, because it's easier. It's easier to assume he's wrong than to assume or to extrapolate that all the other evidence is lying to us.
Okay.
Whereas actually, if you start thinking about why would ancient Athenian writers present something about the burial of the war dead that's not true? And there is something to be said for cultural sensibilities.
Yeah.
It is unacceptable culturally for them to believe that they're not all coming home. And the ritual of the funeral occurs, but of course, the remains are all in coffins.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know how many are in it?
I mean, we have got burials of Athenian warriors outside the city of Athens, haven't we? We've got the Marathon tomb.
Yeah, we got the Marathon tomb, which is often considered the last time it happened.
Oh, okay.
And after that, so they use that as like, well, it definitely couldn't have happened before then. You know, when did Athens start doing this? Couldn't have happened before then. Must have happened after then.
Yeah.
But ultimately, no, we haven't really got evidence of Athenians being buried outside of it. We haven't actually got a lot of evidence of them being buried in it either.
I'm thinking purely logistically, trying to get a corpse back from somewhere fairly close is surely a hell of a lot easier than bringing one back from Asia Minor.
Yeah. And you've got to also take into account one is difficult enough. At the Battle of Delium, where I told you Socrates fought and the Romans get it all wrong and think Xenophon's there. The Athenians lost 1,000 men.
Right.
So when you're thinking logistics, you've got to think they've got to burn 1,000 bodies.
Needs a lot of wood.
It does need a lot of wood. It needs hundreds of tons of wood.
A lot.
Yeah, it's something like I had to do all this as research once. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's something like 330 kilograms of wood to burn a single body.
That's enormous amounts
Yeah.
post-battle where you're not near home territory.
Yeah, and wood is scarce in the Greek world. There's not loads of it. And then, of course, you've got to take into the logistics of space. So how much space does that amount of cremains, so cremated human remains, how much space does that take up? How much does that weigh? How much do you
Where
then...
are you going to get the pots from, the burial pots?
Well, this is it. Because then you've got to take into the logistics of all the pots, which is unlikely.
So the more we discuss logistics, the more sense Xenophon makes.
Yeah. Which actually, remember what I said about him, he's practical. Even his philosophy is practical. He's a practical individual. I don't think he's lying.
No, it doesn't sound like it, does it?
If there was a slip of the pen, the slip was, I shouldn't have said that.
Right.
But Xenophon doesn't seem to care about that.
Because he's practical.
Because it's practical, because it's reality, because that's what happens. That's how you deal with the bodies when you need to, because that is the human element of warfare, which is where we started. And he does not shy away from it.
Is he talking about how many people were buried in Ephesus?
Just a
No.
random aside. It's like they had a battle, they buried the dead, and then they moved on.
Because, yeah, if he brought them home, if he buries them, he just needs some shovels.
Yeah.
But if he brings them home, he needs wood. He needs...
Well, and also you've got to go home.
Yes. How did he get back? Did he march the whole way through? Did they sail? Because marching is the long route. We know that
Marching is the long route. So actually, this
the
whole bit
Persian
about
War.
Ephesus is a complete aside. It's to do with the Athenians. It's nothing to do with the mercenaries at all.
Oh, right.
So the mercenaries, they march all the way to the Black Sea.
Okay, so they do take a long route.
Oh yeah, they take a long route through the mountains, through he gives descriptions like his is the earliest known written description of snow blindness. He describes snow
Really?
blindness. He describes
Wow.
basically hypothermia. He describes struggling in the mountains. It's amazing.
So you can start to see, can't you, why Alexander the Great is using it as a kind of how-to guide.
Yeah.
Because it's
very
not
true.
just, we did glorious stuff here. He's
Yeah.
giving practical information about
Yeah.
terrain and weather and seasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
This is Xenophon. This is why Xenophon's amazing. This is why anyone who puts Xenophon down should get in the bin. As a source, he's just phenomenal, and offers us insight that just no other source in this time period offers us.
Okay. And is that because of his writing style, or is it his personality? Is he deliberately moving away from Thucydides' style to create his own style? Or is he just, he can't resist adding these little details?
That's a really interesting question.
Thank you.
Partly it depends on when you think he wrote it.
Ah, yes, of course.
So depending on when you think he wrote it will determine whether or not you think he was influenced by other history writers in the 4th century,
Okay.
or whether they were influenced by him.
Right.
Okay.
So, okay.
So all that really matters is that he does write a very different history to Thucydides. He reinserts that human element, the religious element, to a much greater extent than Thucydides does. Whether or not he's purposely trying to create a new genre, whether or not he's tapping into a new genre, whether or not he's trying to emulate Thucydides, whether or not he's trying to improve Thucydides, depends entirely on the Xenophon you're creating.
Okay. So we can make our own little
To make your own
conclusions.
judgments. And there is evidence for all of it. So
We've spoken a lot about his travels through Persia and his continuation of the history of Greece after Thucydides ends. What about some of his deep cuts that you've mentioned? Tell me more about some of the more unusual texts that perhaps people haven't heard of.
So, I mean, one of my favorites is Hunting with Dogs. It's a manual on, well, exactly what it sounds like, how to hunt with dogs. It's a brilliant source to understand dog training in the ancient Greek world, to understand relationships with dogs, to understand, because he goes into like how to ensure you're breeding the right males and females that you've got, how to sort of secure the bloodline of particularly strong hunting dogs, things like that.
Oh, wow.
He also talks about what you and I might refer to as breed of dog.
Right.
They're not breeds of dogs in the technical sense, but they are types, the types of dogs. So he talks about the Laconian hound. He talks about the Vulpine type dog. He's got like a whole list of different types of dogs, and what you'd use them for is he's practical.
Okay.
So different types of dogs used for different types of hunting. So I mean, much like today. So like when you look at a terrier type dog that was bred to hunt a particular type of prey,
Sure.
as opposed to like a wolfhound. So Xenophon very much goes into those kind of details, but also like how to kind of identify a dog being good for that task.
So is he writing for fellow rich kids because hunting is a leisure activity, or is he writing for people because hunting is a way to garnish your food from your farm because everyone's living pretty much hand to
that
mouth.
kind of that kind of practical element. I'd probably say it's more the former. There is a scholarly thread at the moment that suggests that a lot of these works are still about teaching people how to live a particular way or like a good way of life. So he
Okay.
is still trying to use these works to instruct people in his sort of deeper philosophical thoughts on life. So yeah, so if that's true, we've got to understand that there is also that kind of element to this as well. But ultimately, like I say, I prefer the practical side of what he does. It's for anyone who wants to hunt with dogs.
So it's simpler language
Yeah.
to make it accessible, but it is still slightly perhaps aspirational.
To an extent, yeah. But like to give you an idea of bonkers stuff that you get from this, he gives a list of appropriate names for dogs.
Okay.
So if you ever sort of read anywhere about the Greeks used to call their dogs this, chances are that came from Xenophon.
Right.
And it's things like loud barker or good on the chase, things like this. But in Greek, kind of gives those kind of sharp, snappy names. But yeah, he just gives a long list, and it is a long list of good names you could give your dog. Okay.
Have you ever named a dog after a name you found in Xenophon? Be honest.
I have not named a dog after anything I've named.
Is that your
found in
choice
Xenophon.
or your wife's choice?
My wife would not allow that at all.
I knew it.
But interestingly, it reminded me many moons ago, I met, speaking of my wife, I met like her great aunt who had dogs, and all her dogs were given names that began with the letter K. And
Right.
it was because she was told that names that begin with the letter K, the sound you make is good for dog recall.
Oh, okay.
So it's the idea that
makes
you
sense.
would use the name of a dog for specific tasks. So not necessarily because it reflects their name, but because it helps them tune into you talking to them. So
Sure.
even today, this idea of using names being relevant to training dogs or relevant to your relationship with dogs beyond just I want to call it Bob. It's I just find it interesting that that's also
Yeah.
present in Xenophon. Arian, I think it's Arian, who a much later writer, who also wrote a book called Anabasis about Alexander the
Oh.
Great and his excursion into Persia, also wrote a book on hunting with dogs, in which most of it is what Xenophon said. So he's got a bit of a fan.
Stalker. Okay.
That's by the by.
Right.
That's a tangent, Alexandra, and I apologise.
That's fine. I was well aware that there would be tangents. It's okay. So, if we were to try and answer the question, and you don't have to go with one, you can invent your own answer. Is he a philosopher? Is he a historian?
Yes.
Okay, so it is possible to
'Cause
be
he is.
both.
Of course it is. It's absolutely ridiculous. So the idea I was watching a small snippet of a historian, Ramirez, was talking about this. And she's a medieval historian, and she was talking about the death of the polymath. So the
Yes,
idea of someone who
yeah,
could be good at a few things.
yeah.
And universities have some sort of part in this, which is very much, especially British universities, where you come in and you have to specialize.
Hmm.
And that's it. And if you want to do something outside that specialism, it's all a bit murky and a bit weird, and no one knows where you fit. So there's this real compartmentalization of subjects and disciplines. And I feel like we've projected this onto people like Xenophon. So Xenophon was a philosopher. Yes, he was. Um, I mean, he was a highly influential philosopher. Like his philosophy and his Socrates influenced cynicism. So the Cynics, the movement of the Cynics, they influenced Stoicism. So this idea of
Okay.
self-restraint, this idea, it's as much Xenophon they're drawing upon from as much as anyone else. So he's very influential as a philosopher. He's just not Plato.
So we can't put him in a box. That would be unfair and, frankly, a bit lazy.
It is lazy. I mean, to see him as a historian is to undermine all of his Socratic work, or worse, to see his philosophy as somehow being about history, because he's a historian. It's looking at his treatise on like how do you look after horses, and like you can't see that through a lens of being just a historian or just a philosopher. You've got to blend all these things together. And it's important that we kind of see him for what he is. So he has a philosophical way of looking at the world. He has a way of thinking people should be acting, and that influences the way he writes history. But he also wrote history. And he also wrote economic works, and he also wrote work on public spending and public revenues, and how Athens could perhaps do better and improve its income. So, these kind of practical, like I keep mentioning, those kind of practical elements as well. He's not the traditional polymath in terms of,
No.
the sciences, the arts, all these things that come together. He's not traditionally that. But having said that, he wrote historical fiction. So why can't we see him as that? He's bringing together all these different interests, all these different things, and what label you give him becomes immaterial. What's important is the work itself and the context within him and that work. So this is why, for anyone who's sort of engaging with ancient history, it's true of all sources, but especially Xenophon, you got to keep an eye on when he's talking about where in his life he is, and the sort of the dates and the ages of what's going on, because that adds those contexts for you, or at least allows you to kind of pick away at the context as a result, and to be able to get more from it.
And we've got to approach it with a broad mind, knowing that he's not just trying to do one thing at any one time.
Yeah, precisely that. And also with the knowledge that actually we probably don't know what he's trying to do.
So for anyone who hasn't read any Xenophon yet, where do you think they should start?
Anabasis. Definitely read the Anabasis.
Anabasis,
I think
okay.
any ancient historian, anyone who wants to get into ancient history, should read the Anabasis. The Anabasis, in good translation, is a rip-roaring read.
Okay, so it's going to be fun as well as...
Yeah.
Right, okay.
It is. I used to, I was supervised many moons ago by an Athenian military historian, ancient Greek military historian called Jason Crowley. And he used to refer to it as Bravo 20 of the ancient world. So it's this idea of, stuck behind
Right.
enemy lines. And it has that kind of intensity to it throughout. It's a fantastic read. Don't read the Iliad. Don't read Homer. Read Xenophon's Anabasis. It is fantastic. And it's a brilliant place to start.
Okay. And then Hellenica is number 2?
It's long, isn't it? It's a long read.
I'm going to ask a question here. Should you read Hellenica before you read Thucydides, or should you only read Hellenica after you've finished Thucydides?
I mean, personally, I would read them as a continuation. So I would start Thucydides and then continue it on. A bit like when an author dies today and then they bring in another author to pick up the stories. You still start at the beginning of the series to motivate through.
Okay.
So yeah, that would be my general advice on that.
And people should read Thucydides anyway, right?
Yeah, to be fair, Thucydides, again, in good translation, is an interesting read. But it's a bit like reading... this might upset some people. It's a bit like reading Lord of the Rings. When you get to like the 2 pages describing a door.
Yeah, and then Tom Bombadil comes in and starts singing some bloody song for 7 pages.
Right, okay, that's great. Skip that bit.
Right.
So Thucydides, yeah. But I think that's true of all the histories. You can sit and read them. They're kind of interesting, but if political history isn't your thing, you're going to find it hard going. If you're interested in just the kind of lives, the stories, the reality of things going on, those kind of personal relationships, Xenophon's Anabasis, up there, that's probably one of, if not the best source for it.
So with the Anabasis and the Hellenica, have you got any translations that you would recommend for people to go out if they've not read him before and they really want a good translation, nice and accessible? What would you recommend?
Yeah,
because I know I love my Landmark editions because
I love Landmark, but they're terribly translated.
Are they?
Well, that's not fair.
Don't tell me that.
They're old. They're quite old translations, or or sort of revised versions of it. So if you ever talk to like a specialist in Thucydides, for instance, they're always like, "It's a brilliant edition. Find a better translation."
Okay,
but
the maps and the notes, fantastic.
It's just so useful, and they have a Xenophon's Anabasis.
They do. I own it.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's as good a place to end it because personally, a translation is, yeah. So, translations are useful for various things. One of them is an accurate representation of the original text. That's one
Yeah.
form of a good translation. Another form of a good translation is the feel of a text.
Mm-hmm.
You often find this when people translate poetry. So, you get people like me, absolute heretics, who give me a
You
bit of
said it.
Greek poetry and I will translate it as literally as possible so that I can get as much value of evidence from it as possible. What I
Yeah.
won't do is really care about meter or rhythm
Right.
or the feel of the piece. And that, in many ways, destroys the medium of what it is. So you go to, especially classicists, they're really good at translating and keeping that rhythm, that feel, that the kind of the soul of a piece.
Mm-hmm.
But often as a historian, I get frustrated and go, well, you've just changed the bloody translation of the word. That's not what that word means at all. But it's the
Right.
same feel. I'll give you that. But it's important. The word they used is important. So the historian in me finds that frustrating. So you've got translations for that, but other ones, like you were saying, like the Landmark series, are brilliant. Not necessarily because the translation is the best translation, but because the Anabasis, you go on this massive journey through the Persian Empire, then out again, through places that you've never heard of.
Mm-hmm.
You want maps.
Yeah.
And you
Maps are
want
good.
accessible maps regularly. The other thing I like about the Landmark series is the essays at the back.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
the
they are
short
good.
essays explaining Xenophon's world, or the Persian Empire, or the military stuff that's going on, or what it's like to be a mercenary, or all these things. So it might answer some of the questions that you have as you're reading it.
Yeah, if you need the
And
context, they give it to
yeah,
you.
and then it mentions it in footnotes. So there's a footnote to something. You go to know more about what it's like to be a mercenary. Go and look at page
Mm-hmm.
thing, and it talks about it. So I do like the Landmark series for that. But the Penguin series. I mean, if you want to go cheaper, I've always enjoyed the translations of the Penguin series to read. I've always found
Yeah.
them very good. The Oxford Classical series, again, easy to read. And if it's your first introduction, that's what you want. You want something that's easy to read, something that's engaging, something that you're not just going to get lost in and go, this is clearly beyond me, or I don't understand anything that's going on. You don't want that. You want a resource or a translation that makes it feel engaging. So, yeah, I'd recommend it. Xenophon is so hard to translate in a boring way, especially as Anabasis.
Okay.
The Anabasis is
That's
such
interesting
an
then.
interesting book. Um,
So if you find a boring translation of Xenophon, it's because
th-
someone is right. Okay.
yeah,
I won't
don't
say
don't don't email me telling me I found one
it.
because I don't care. I'm not reading it.
Yeah, I mean, people like me, we will have 5 different translations because we collect
Yeah.
them like, psychopaths. But if you're going to have one, a Penguin or an Oxford World Classics, good choice.
Yeah,
If you like the maps, and God, I love a map. Landmarks are sexy.
this is it. This is it. So,
There we go.
yeah, any of them really, and just start from there. You'd be amazed how readable even his really weird practical guides are.
Okay.
And they're also short, which helps. Um, but also, like his biography of Agesilaus is a brilliant read. He's obviously slanted. He obviously likes the man, and obviously relies on Spartan support for what him living where he is. So there's what we might refer to as biases inherent. But
Yeah.
his account of Agesilaus is a great read.
So I love the fact that he appears to have been writing accessibly for his own time, and he's really accessible now.
Yeah, yeah, it's
That's the
brilliant.
sign of a good writer. I like him.
I'd agree.
I don't know about his thoughts about, women throwing themselves off cliffs or having sex parties. Maybe not. But accessibility, I'm all for it.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Why not?
got to give him his flowers for that. So one last question.
Mhm.
If you had to sum up the one huge impact that Xenophon had on the whole world, what's the main thing that we can say, yeah, that's pretty cool?
Oh, blimey. I mean, ultimately, there is a tradition in the ancient world that Thucydides was not well read, so people weren't reading his work. until
Okay.
Xenophon did his.
Right.
So there is even a rumor that he might have been involved in the editing of it.
Okay.
We don't know if it's true. We don't know what that's based on. But if it is, it might well be that Xenophon is responsible for our entire understanding of the ancient Greek world from about 450 to 350 BC.
Okay.
Now, you won't find that in a book.
So by making Thucydides cool, he has himself made history cool.
There we go. He is the reason history is cool. There you go. How's that?
I like that. What a perfect place to finish.
Oh,
That's awesome though, because as I say, at my own undergrad, we barely read him. We read Constitution of the Athenians, which probably wasn't even him, but we never got as far as the 4th century because, an undergrad only has so much time and so many things to teach. They're going to focus on the 5th century. 4th century, I think, needs a bit more attention, and I'm so glad that you've come onto the show to give that period of time and this particular man a little bit more attention because, by God, it sounds like he deserves it.
absolutely. Completely agree. But thanks for inviting me on to talk about him.
It's a pleasure. I'm sure we will be seeing you again soon. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a brand new appreciation of all things Xenophon. If you want to know more about Xenophon, you can head to our website, ancienthistory101.org, where we have compiled some further reading links, some supplementary material, and you can learn more about Owen Rees and his work. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do let us know. And if you're not subscribed yet, why not? Click that button. We have new episodes every Wednesday. See you next week for more Ancient History 101.